Have you ever wondered what happens when two completely different worlds collide? Imagine this: an Apache girl, fierce and free, in the rugged heart of the American West, where survival is everything. And then, out of nowhere, a rancher, a man of the land, hardened by his past and solitary life, comes into her world. A romance? Impossible, right? But what if this was the story that would defy all odds? What if love found a way where no one expected it? Before we dive in, please drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who would love it too. The year is 1881. The winds howl across the barren plains, and the scent of sagebrush lingers in the air. This is a time when the West was wild, untamed, and still bleeding from the scars of history. A place where every man and woman carved their survival out of the earth itself. But not all stories of the West were written in the dust of battle or the tales of gunslingers. Some were written in the quieter moments, where the hearts of men and women dared to cross borders they were told never to cross. This is the story of one such crossing. Her name was Apache, and she was unlike anyone else. To the Apache people, she was a daughter of the earth, proud, strong, and untamed. Her heart was woven into the land, into the traditions of her people. But there was a fire inside her, a fire that burned against the expectations of her tribe. Apache was not like the other girls, dutifully learning the ways of the Apache women, preparing to become a wife and mother. She wanted more. She wanted freedom. The elders spoke of her in whispers, some with admiration, others with concern. She had rejected the suitors who lined up for her, not because she didn't want love, but because she would decide who would win her heart. No man had ever been worthy, not yet. Apache walked with the confidence of a woman who knew what she wanted, and for now, what she wanted was the untamed world around her, not the confines of tradition. And then there was Jack Callahan, a rancher who had seen the dust of 1,000 trails. His cattle, his land, his solitude, that was his world. He'd learned the hard way not to trust anyone, especially women. He'd lost everything once before to a woman who didn't understand him. Jack had become something else since then, a man defined by the calluses on his hands, the dust in his throat, and the unspoken words buried deep within him. But on that particular morning, something was different. He was out on the farthest part of his ranch, a quiet, unassuming place that he thought no one would ever find, not even an Apache girl. But the land is vast, and secrets are always waiting to be uncovered. It was a day like any other when he spotted her. She was standing on a rocky outcrop, looking out over the horizon as though the whole world belonged to her, Apache. She hadn't seen him yet. The wind tugged at her shawl as the sun burned its way across the sky. Her stance was defiant, proud, undeniably powerful. Jack knew better than to approach. There were whispers of Apache scouts in the area, but the curiosity in his chest wouldn't let him leave. He had to know why she was here. He moved slowly, his boots crunching on the dry ground. She heard him, and in a heartbeat, her hand was on the knife at her belt. "I don't need your help, white man," she said, her voice steady, cold as the mountains behind her. Jack froze, his gaze never leaving her. She was beautiful, wild, and fiercely independent, but there was something else in her eyes, a deep, unfathomable loneliness, and that hit him harder than any of the dangers that surrounded them. "I wasn't here to offer help," he replied, his voice calm. "Just curious what a girl like Chloe is doing so far from your people." Apache didn't flinch. "I'm not your concern." But the truth was, she had no idea how much he was her concern. Something about her spoke to a part of Jack that he'd buried long ago, and as he stood there, a strange feeling began to wash over him, a feeling he hadn't expected from a chance meeting in the wilderness. Over the next few days, their paths crossed again. At first, it was casual. Jack had cattle to tend, and Apache had her own reasons for roaming the wilderness. But with each meeting, a strange bond began to form. They didn't speak much at first. He was the quiet type, and she didn't trust easily. But there was an undeniable pull between them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack found her again, sitting beside the small creek that ran through his land. She had a fire in front of her, the glow illuminating her face in soft orange hues. "You're still here," he said, stepping carefully toward her. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I have nowhere else to go." He nodded. A part of him wanted to ask why, but he didn't. Instead, he sat across from her, respecting the silence between them. That silence spoke volumes, and in that moment it felt as though they were from two different worlds, each lost in their own grief, their own struggles, yet bound together by the fragile thread of something else. But there was something more, a tension that neither of them could ignore. Alishanny was not the type to fall for a rancher, not this rancher. She'd grown up hearing the stories of how white men had encroached on her people's land, taken what wasn't theirs, and treated her people as lesser. Could she really trust someone like him? Jack, on the other hand, couldn't shake the idea that this wild Apache girl held the answers to questions he'd never known to ask. He felt drawn to her, but he knew the complications it would bring. After all, what kind of future could they possibly have? So what do you think? Can love really conquer all when it seems like everything, culture, history, and personal fears stand in the way? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Would you take a chance on a love that challenges everything you believe in? The wind picked up, carrying the scent of danger with it. Jack Callahan had no idea that this was the day everything would change. He had spent weeks working the land, but every time he caught sight of Alishanny, he felt the invisible pull between them grow stronger. But today, something was different. He didn't know it yet, but the storm that had been brewing for days was about to break. Alishanny was not alone. Jack was in the barn when he heard it, a distant shout, a voice carried on the wind. His heart clenched as he recognized the sound of hooves pounding the earth, a rhythm that was unmistakable. It wasn't just the usual rustling of cattle or the occasional passing rider. This was something worse. A group. He grabbed his rifle and rushed out the door, his boots pounding against the ground. His gaze scanned the horizon, and there, in the distance, he saw them. Apache riders, fast and furious, charging across the plains as a storm unleashed. Alishanny, was she one of them? No, there was no way. His heart raced as he realized the truth. A group of Apache raiders had come for him, for his cattle, for his land. But where was Alishanny? He rushed toward the creek where he'd last seen her, but the closer he got, the more he realized the deadly truth. She was caught in the middle. The raiders were closing in fast, and Alishanny, with her sharp instincts, had already spotted them. She was on the other side of the creek, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the danger. She knew the land better than anyone. It was her home, but this wasn't just a raid. It was a fight for survival. As Jack came closer, his thoughts raced. Should he intervene? Should he help her? Every instinct in his body screamed to protect her, but he knew that helping an Apache girl, no matter how strong she was, would bring its own consequences. But before he could make a decision, the situation erupted. The raiders stormed in, guns drawn, voices shouting in a language Jack didn't understand. Alishanny was already moving, agile as a wildcat, dodging their attacks. She didn't seem afraid. She was a warrior. But Jack wasn't sure how long she could hold out against so many. The tension in the air was suffocating. It felt like the land itself was holding its breath. Would Jack stand back and let her face this alone? Or would he cross the line, even if it meant forever changing his life? As Alishanny fought off two of the raiders, her movements precise and deadly, Jack made up his mind. He had to do something. He couldn't watch her die, not when he could help. But when he drew his rifle and took aim, his hand shook, not from fear, but from the realization of what he was about to do. He wasn't just protecting her. No, this was more than that. This was his chance to change everything, to choose a side. His finger tightened on the trigger, but just as he was about to pull it, something stopped him. A low, chilling growl echoed through the air. It was coming from the hills. The ground trembled as a new threat emerged, a massive black bear, drawn by the chaos of the battle. It charged down the slope, hungry, enraged, and entirely unpredictable. Alishanny's eyes widened as the bear lunged toward her, knocking two of the raiders to the ground. Without hesitation, she dove into the fray, moving faster than Jack could follow. But Jack wasn't sure if it was instinct or desperation. This bear didn't care who it attacked. It was hungry, and it was going to rip apart whoever was in its path. The scene descended into chaos. Jack wasn't sure where the bear had come from or how it knew to target the raiders, but now both sides of the battle were on edge. The air was thick with gunfire, screams, and the roar of the massive animal. Alishani moved like a shadow, barely avoiding the bear's massive paws and the raiders' desperate shots. Every heartbeat felt like an eternity. Alishani was fast. She was faster than any of them, but even she couldn't outrun the fear. The bear circled, its claws scratching against the earth, but it wasn't just hunting. It was protecting the land from the intruders. Its instincts were just as sharp as hers. Jack didn't have time to think. He acted. His rifle cracked in the air, a shot aimed at the bear, but the creature was too fast. It swiped at the nearest raider, knocking him to the ground with a single blow. The other raiders scattered, abandoning their plan to take the cattle. In that instant, Jack was left with only one option, to save Alishani. He ran forward, leaping into the fray, grabbing her by the arm just as she twisted to evade the bear's swipe. Together, they darted toward cover, barely making it to the shelter of a rocky outcrop. Breathing heavily, Jack pulled her close. "You okay?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Alishani's eyes met his, filled with equal parts fire and exhaustion. "I'm fine, but they—" She gestured to the raiders, who had started to regroup, glaring at them both. The situation hadn't improved. In fact, it had gotten worse. But Jack wasn't about to back down now. His heart pounded in his chest as he watched the raiders begin to circle again. They weren't just after his cattle anymore. They wanted something far more dangerous. Revenge. Jack knew he couldn't do this alone. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the cold reality of the situation was starting to sink in. He had already crossed the line by protecting Alishani, but now he realized something else. He couldn't leave her behind. Not now. Not ever. Her tribe. Her people. His people, too. Now were bound together by the same land. They weren't so different after all. Alishani, her face grim, turned to him. "You didn't have to help me, rancher. You didn't owe me anything. Jack didn't answer right away." Instead, he looked out at the approaching raiders, calculating his next move. "Maybe I didn't, but I do now." Alishani's lips parted, a fleeting look of surprise crossing her face. She wasn't used to this kind of selflessness, not from someone like him, but her expression quickly hardened again. "You know this changes everything, right?" Jack nodded. "Yeah, it does. But maybe it's time I start changing too." The raiders had regrouped. The bear was nowhere in sight, but the tension was thick in the air. They were moving in slowly, like wolves hunting their prey. Alishani's eyes darted between Jack and the oncoming threat. "We don't have much time. They'll come for us." "Not if we get to them first," Jack said, his voice low. "I don't know about you, but I'm not letting them take anything from me, or from you." And so, the final stand began. But as Jack and Alishani prepared to face their enemies, a deeper question lingered in the air, unanswered, waiting for the next moment to unravel. Could they really survive the storm, or would the land tear them apart just as it had done to so many others before them? What do you think? Is it possible for two people from such different worlds to find common ground in the middle of a battlefield? Will Jack and Alishani make it out alive, or is this where their story ends? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear what you think. The crack of gunfire echoed across the land, a sound that seemed to shatter the silence of the wilderness. But it wasn't just a shot. It was the sound of something bigger, a line being crossed. A line that had been drawn not in the sand, but in the heart. Jack Callahan stood tall, his rifle steady in his hands, his eyes focused on the approaching raiders. The land was no longer just a place to survive. It had become the battleground for something far more important. His chance at redemption, and maybe, just maybe, his chance at love. But as Alishani stood beside him, ready for whatever was coming next, there was an undeniable question in the air. Could they truly fight back against everything that was working to tear them apart? The raiders had stopped their advance, their eyes locked on the two of them. There was no going back. Jack wasn't just protecting cattle anymore. He was protecting Alishani, his own heart, and everything he had come to realize about this woman. her strength, and the land they both called home. "Stay low," Jack whispered to Alashanny, his voice tight with tension. His finger hovered over the trigger, eyes scanning for the best angle. She nodded, her own gaze sharp. "I know, but they won't stop. Not until we're both dead." Jack didn't look at her. He knew she was right. They were trapped in a world where the rules were written by violence and fear, where alliances were as fragile as a breath of wind. But there was something inside him now, something that burned with purpose. He wasn't just going to survive. He was going to fight. For her. For himself. For a future he never thought possible. Alashanny's voice broke through the haze of adrenaline. "If we survive this, what then, rancher?" It was a question Jack hadn't allowed himself to answer. But now, as the raiders circled closer, he realized that maybe he didn't need to know the full answer. Maybe surviving was enough for now. The raiders made their move, charging forward with guns drawn. But Jack and Alashanny weren't going down without a fight. They had their own weapons, courage, resilience, and a bond forged in fire. Alashanny was faster than the others. She moved like lightning, her body honed by years of survival in a harsh land. She darted from one side of the rocks to the other, using the terrain to her advantage, while Jack fired off shots, covering her movements. Together, they created a symphony of chaos, the kind that made even the toughest men hesitate. One raider, a large man with a scar running down his face, charged at Jack, shouting a battle cry, but Jack was ready. He fired once, twice, hitting the man square in the chest, sending him crashing to the ground. But even as he fell, Jack could see the other raiders closing in. They were relentless, and they weren't just after him anymore. They were after both of them. Alashanny wasn't standing idly by. She had already taken down two of the raiders with swift, lethal precision. But the remaining raiders weren't going to make it easy. They were closing in. Jack glanced at her, their eyes meeting in a moment of understanding. They both knew what had to be done. The world they'd fought to protect was shrinking fast, and the final decision was up to them. Could they break through? Could they escape this nightmare? Just when it seemed like they were doomed, fate stepped in. The roar of the black bear, the one that had interrupted their earlier fight, echoed again, louder this time, more powerful. The raiders paused, looking toward the sound, momentarily distracted. Alashanny's face lit up with recognition. "It's the bear," she said, almost with a smile. Jack didn't question it. He didn't care how it happened. He knew that the bear was their salvation. The raiders, thrown off balance, hesitated just long enough for Jack and Alashanny to make a run for it. They bolted for the trees, weaving through the underbrush, moving faster than they ever had before. Behind them, the bear tore into the remaining raiders, its fury unstoppable. Jack's heart pounded as he and Alashanny moved through the forest. Every step was a prayer. Every second was a fight for their survival. But even in the chaos, something deeper had begun to shift. Their bond, born from pain, born from loss, was growing into something undeniable. The battle had ended, but their war wasn't over. They had escaped the immediate threat, but they both knew that their world had changed forever. There would be consequences for what they'd done, for siding with each other, for breaking the rules that had governed their lives. They sat together in a clearing, the sounds of the forest around them a strange kind of peace after the storm. Jack could hear Alashanny's breathing slow as she leaned against a tree, her eyes watching the sun dip below the horizon. "I never thought I'd find myself here," Jack said, his voice low, almost to himself. Alashanny glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Neither did I, but I think we've both crossed too many lines to go back now." Jack met her gaze, the weight of her words settling between them. What had started as a fight for survival had turned into something much deeper. They weren't just fighting for their lives anymore. They were fighting for their place in the world. "You're right," he said, his voice steady. "But I can't go back, either. Not after this." Alashanny didn't respond immediately. She just watched the sky, the weight of everything between them hanging in the air. The silence stretched long, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes when two people understand each other more deeply than words could convey. "I thought I could never be with someone like you," Alashanny said softly. Her voice was like the wind, unpredictable, but always true. "You're not like me, Jack. You're not from my world." Jack nodded, his eyes dark with the weight of his own past. "I know, but maybe that's what makes this work. I never thought I'd be with someone like you either. But here we are." Alishani turned to him then, her eyes searching his face. "What now, rancher? What happens when the storm dies down? When everything calms and the world goes back to the way it was?" Jack took a breath, his hand reaching out to hers. "I don't know, but maybe that's the point. Maybe we don't have to have it all figured out. Maybe we just have to keep moving forward." The next few days were a blur of decisions, of words unspoken, and thoughts shared in the quiet moments between them. They returned to the ranch, knowing full well that their fight wasn't over. The raiders had been pushed back, but there were always more. There was always danger lurking in the distance, but there was also something else, a possibility, a chance. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew they couldn't face it alone. Jack looked at Alishani, his heart full, his mind set on a future he hadn't expected but would fight for with everything he had. They had chosen each other, and that choice was stronger than anything the world could throw at them. But as they sat together, looking out at the horizon, there was still one lingering question. Could love really overcome the impossible? Could a rancher and an Apache girl ever truly live in peace in a world that didn't understand their love? The story wasn't over. Not yet. What do you think? Will Jack and Alishani's love survive the trials ahead? Can they truly build a future together, or is the land, too, divided for their bond to last? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you want to see more stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a moment of this Wild West journey. Days turned into weeks, and Jack and Alishani stood side by side, watching the world around them slowly begin to settle. The land was scarred, the past never forgotten, but something had changed in both of them. They had weathered storms, fought battles, and survived in a world that was often unforgiving. And now they were at a crossroads. Alishani sat by the fire one evening, the crackling embers casting a soft glow on her face. Jack sat beside her, watching her carefully. "Are you afraid?" Jack finally asked, his voice low. Alishani didn't look at him right away. Instead, she stared into the fire, her eyes lost in thought. "Of course I'm afraid," she said quietly. "But not for the reasons you think." Jack leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "What do you mean?" She met his gaze then, her eyes clear and unwavering. "I'm afraid of losing this, losing us. I've spent my whole life fighting to survive, but now I'm learning to fight for something else, something I didn't think was possible." Jack's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't just talking about survival anymore. She was talking about the future, a future with him. The world around them had already shown them how unforgiving it could be. They had both known loss and hardship, but they had also found something in each other, something worth protecting, even when it seemed impossible. But could they really build a life together? Could they ever truly escape the prejudices of the world around them? Jack stood up and walked to the edge of the ranch, staring out at the horizon. Alishani joined him, standing beside him, their shoulders brushing lightly in the cool breeze. "I've spent so many years fighting against everything," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know what I was fighting for until I met you. But now, I see it. I'm fighting for something worth it, something I didn't know I could have." Alishani took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "Then we fight together," she said, her voice strong and steady. "No matter what comes next, we fight together." They didn't need any more words. In that moment, their past, their fears, and their uncertainties all faded away. The only thing left was the certainty that they had chosen each other, and that was enough. As the sun set behind them, casting the land in a golden light, Jack and Alishani stood together, hand in hand. The challenges they faced were far from over, but in each other they had found something they hadn't expected: love, strength, and the courage to defy the odds. Their journey wasn't going to be easy, but they were ready to face it together. The world may have tried to tear them apart, but they had proven that even in the wildest, most unforgiving place, love could thrive. As they watched the sun dip below the horizon, the question still lingered. Could a rancher and an Apache girl truly carve out a life in a world that didn't understand their love? The answer? Only time would tell. What do you think? Do you believe Jack and Alishanny can truly build a life together, or will the world tear them apart once again? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's continue this conversation. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories from the Wild West Outlaw Chronicles. Turn on the notification bell so you won't miss what happens next, because the journey is far from over. Thanks for watching.